Welcome to How to Belong, the podcast that delves into the human quest to find a sense of belonging in what can often feel like a lonely world. Join us as we talk to guests who've navigated their own unique paths, what we like to call their hero journeys, from feeling like they don't fit in, to the profound realisation that true belonging can only ever be found from within. I'm Naomi E Lloyd, and this is the How to Belong podcast. Hello and a festive welcome back to How to Belong. Today is a special one, our final roundup episode for season 1. I can't quite believe it. It feels like just yesterday, I was kicking things off. You might remember, actually, in that very first episode, we flipped the script because I got Steve, my amazing producer, to interview me about why I wanted to start this podcast. So now, as we wrap up this first chapter, it feels really fitting to bring Steve back on. Not really to interview me this time, but to have a proper chat about what this season has brought us. I'll be sharing the lessons I have personally taken away from our incredible guests, what the journey has meant to me, and even a sneak peek at what's in store for season 2. But since it's December, we also wanted to reflect on this time of year and what it means for belonging. The festive season can be magical, sure, but it can also bring up feelings of disconnection, whether that's due to divorce, blended families, or missing loved ones who are no longer there. So, Steve, someone who's been through divorce and remarriage himself, will be sharing his perspective on this too. So, without further ado, let's dive in. So, hello, Steve. How are you?
I'm all right, Naomi. How are you?
I'm very happy to be recording this with you because it feels full circle. It was so scary that first time we got together. Do you remember the Elizabeth Foundation?
Yeah, I wasn't scared.
You weren't scared. You were loving it. You were in expert mode and just watching it all.
I loved it. I loved it.
Well, I did love it, but I was so self-conscious of my voice and should I be doing this? Do you remember having that conversation all the way back then? And now you can't shut me up now.
You are certainly not as self-conscious of your voice in a good way as you were back then. I think you've got a real balanced tone to your voice now, and you've got used to being in front of the mic, and that's what makes a difference, and talking to different people. So
that's it, and technology as well. I mean, I've had a few techno hiccups along the way because it doesn't always go to plan, but like all these ventures in life, if you thought about it too much, you'd probably never do it. It's like when I first decided I wanted to write a book, in fact, definitely, but I've known how difficult that would be. I never would have embarked on it. I just known how long it would take. And it's the same with a podcast. Yeah. I applied the same thinking that if I thought about it too much, I wouldn't do it. Right. And I'm really glad that I met you that day for coffee and then we went on to do it because it's been really enriching. Yeah. And things like the fact that I've got used to hearing my voice, and that's a really important thing. It brings a lot of value to you as a person, I think, being able. Everybody always says I hate the sound of my voice. We always say that, don't we? And to be able to, say I don't mind it now. That because your voice is so important. It's you're walking around with talking to people all the time. So actually listening back to yourself is really, really therapeutic.
See, it's interesting because I distinctly remember in those early days. How challenging you thought it was going to be. It kind of felt like this was a major undertaking. And I remember, because we recorded a couple of times, didn't we, in 2 different places in the Elizabeth Foundation. I haven't spoken to Karen for a while, actually. Must catch up with her.
Yeah, Karen's lovely.
She is. But it was really interesting for me to see the Naomi that was starting the journey. And I knew where you were going to end up, because a lot of the people I produce podcasts for do the same thing. They start off thinking, I can't do this. Is this me? Where's this going? How am I going to make this interesting for people? And very quickly you got into it, and very quickly you started talking to guests and bringing all sorts of different, and it's the stories, isn't it? It's their stories that you've brought to life. And it's been a beautiful thing to see you go on this journey of going from sort of, where does the wire go?
Oh, the wire.
to an accomplished host. And, certainly you got into your stride really quickly, and you do a particularly good job of making people feel calm and relaxed and just being themselves. And, our listeners will have heard that. I paused then because I've just realised that I've just said our listeners, and we have said, haven't we, that this is like another dual podcast transmission. So this will go out on How to Belong, but I'll also put this out on Sharp Podcast. So hello, Sharp Podcast listeners.
Hello.
Just to make sure you're not confused, we've decided to put this out because we'll be talking about some of the Sharp Podcast stuff as well as the How to Belong stuff. But seeing you go on that journey and become such an accomplished host and really making people feel comfortable, it's been a real pleasure to be part of and to see that transformation.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. And thank you for, coming on the journey with me. And are you going to stay? Are you going to stay on the journey?
Sure. Yeah.
Because we've got some amazing guests coming up.
Yes. So that's looking forward.
Yeah.
So looking back, you've had some pretty remarkable people on,
really. I'm very privileged, very honoured that people have taken the time to share the stories, and some really emotional ones. I mean, the first episode was you and I talking. Yeah. Second one was with Donna Freed, and that. I mean, I still think about that now. It was just so emotional, and I took so much away from it. We were talking about her experience of going back to her roots and finding out about her origin story because she was adopted, and I won't go into it now, but it was a story of finding out some real drama had taken place in her birth, and parents had faked their own death in the start of her life, and so can you imagine finding all these things out? I mean, people do have crazy stories when they start digging about, but hers was so in her face and so raw. But she was just such an amazing storyteller, and she shared a story. She shared some tears with me, and having a lot of my story about wanting to do this was about grief of losing my own mum, and she was talking about how important that bond is with a mother, and just it's hearing it from other people. I think that's what's so profound about going on these stories, telling journeys, because you hear other people's story right in front of you, and it makes a difference. And I'm sure, hopefully it does to people listening as well. But when you're sitting right next to somebody and they're sharing their stories, it makes you feel connected. You're not on your own. There's people all over the world every day, every minute dealing with these heartbreaks and these changes in lives that sometimes in the Western world we're not always good at doing, and talking about loss and grief and things like that. So that first interview guest was just amazing.
And I mean, the emotion that came across in that conversation, and how some bits that were challenging for Donna to talk about and that kind of stuff was really, really significant. And it's a really good example of you just helping people bring these stories to life. And when we listen as listeners, kind of we're in our own world and we've got our own challenges, and to hear someone else telling that kind of story is powerful. Naomi, is there anywhere where people can go back and listen to that episode?
There is. That was episode 2.
Okay.
Donna Freed. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a really moving story. Who else had a big impression on you?
Fatima Whitbird was the last guest that I interviewed before this one, and I'm not really sure I've completely recovered in the most positive way from getting the opportunity to speak to such just a mind-blowingly impressive person. It's the only way I can think of saying it. She's so impressive. To think her start of life was so cruel, so horrendously cruel, and to think that what she calls her birth mother, had treated her so appallingly, and then the subsequent things that she had to go through in the care system. And now she is, all these years later, she has this ministry, and I thought that was a powerful word and a way of living life, that she has a ministry, and that's like trying to help people their children in the care system. Again, how I feel very privileged that I got to hear that story and be able that she talked to me about it. And she's so busy, she's launching a book and a Christmas single, so many things going on. And it just felt when she was talking to me and she was giving me some of that positive energy, and it really put things into perspective. It really puts things into perspective. Yeah. You know, we can all look back on things and think, oh, why did that happen to me? Or why did I have to go through that? And, you know, you can't always tell why some people got dealt different cards to others. It's just the way life is. And when you speak to her, she's the sort of person that absolutely takes that approach in life, that these are the cards I've got, this is what I'm going to do with it, not the other way around. The glass is half full. So, and
what I found really interesting in that episode was, apart from Fatima's story, which obviously is the centre of the conversation, and what an amazing person she is, you had some technical challenges in recording it, and she was so kind so accommodating, wasn't she? Because, you know, she's a famous person, busy. It would be understandable if she said, "Look, I'm really sorry. If you can't get this stuff sorted out, we're going to have to do it some other time." But she was really patient and you know and made you feel good, didn't she?
She really did. And I have to also say thank you to Emily Burt from Spark Community Space, because I was recording it there, and Fatima couldn't connect to the recording system that I'd invited her to, and Emily came along and helped me. Because I was nearly in tears. I was thinking I'm going to lose this opportunity to speak to her. And we only had a very short window. But Emily helped me turn it around. And like you say, Fatima, she could have just said, you know, I'm too busy. Yeah. And who are you? Like, who is Naomi Lloyd? Like, why is she, you know, messing this up, sort of thing. And, you know, again, because she lives life in that real pure way, which is, we're all people, we're all human beings, and everybody's equal and deserves time and understanding. And, you know, things do go wrong, and whether it's your fault or not, things go wrong. And it was, I think I always tend to think, I assume that people are going to get cross. And that's just part of my life experience. I'm going to be in trouble. You know, I mean, I'm not a child, obviously, that's a ridiculous thing to say, but yeah, I realise that, like, my default is to go, I'm going to get in trouble now. It's my fault. Negative. And seeing the way that Fatima reacted to that situation, a busy period in her life, was just was really life reassuring that people actually, doesn't matter how famous they are, they will help you out.
And the other thing that, if I remember rightly, she even took the time at the end to name your mum-in-law's. What was? Remind me what it was that.
Well,
you were talking about.
So my mother-in-law, Molly Lloyd, shout out to Molly. She has fostered over 300 children. Now, actually, I'm going to put that in because apparently I said 200. Okay. And I was really excited to share with her, oh, look, you know, I've mentioned you on the podcast. And she goes, well, it was actually 300. Oh, my goodness. Which is an incredible life work, isn't it? And I've mentioned it to Fatima, and I never would have asked her to record this, but she made a point of, let's record it a few times to make sure we get it right. I think she called her my granny or something rather than my mum-in-law. And, you know, she still said, let's stop. No, it's okay. I want to make sure it gets out to Molly. It's so lovely.
So Fatima is the most recent one that you recorded. The second one that wasn't with me was with Clemens, wasn't it?
Oh, yes.
And if I remember rightly, at the start of you putting this together, your focus was on diamonds and you know, how diamonds are formed by pressure and that connection with finding your place and belonging. And Clemens just came along as like this perfect storm of experience and so on that could talk about that subject, but in a really interesting way.
Yeah, that was actually one of the most listened episodes.
Wow.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And it wasn't a really long episode. I met Clemens a few years ago, so it was really kind of her. She lives in Rome, so it was great to see her on video again. And what I realised about that episode was, yes, there is something very compelling about this discussion about the value that we are made to think is value on the surface level, diamonds being what we're talking about. And Clemens, being somebody who works in the industry, explained that is an industry made-up value of diamonds. Yes. And that when you really understand diamonds, you understand that what makes them so unique is all the little elements inside of them that they've trapped and absorbed along the way. But from an industry point of view, the more of these little trappings and little gems inside a diamond, actually that's what makes them less valuable. And we just talked about how this relates to human beings and the society of the pressure of living in this sort of made-up value system that we live in. You know, what is perfect? And it's often not it's not uniqueness. It's usually this society constructed idea of a perfection. And I've had this conversation before with Clemens, and we've discussed it over the years, but I haven't done it for a while. So then having that conversation again, I came away really, really happy. It's very, very interesting to hear somebody in the industry talking that way, and it's unusual.
But also for those of us not in the industry, this idea that the average person perhaps thinks that diamonds are held up as a thing of perfection, and the whole irony is that it's their imperfections that make them unique, and how that idea supported your journey about belonging and people holding themselves to standards that other people have decided what they are.
Yeah.
And actually, the beauty is when people let go of that and say, I don't need to meet your standards. I'm my own person, which then brings us on to Jodie, because you then had that conversation with Jodie, didn't you, about her conflict of meeting what she thought other people thought she should be.
Yeah.
And she was really open, wasn't she?
Jodie was incredible. The Jodie Goodchild was, I think that would be episode 4. And Jodie explained that she didn't really start living her life properly until she was 19. So she almost feels like that first 19 years wasn't really a full life at all, because she wasn't living as she should be as somebody who is a lesbian. And all the teenage year experiences of thinking, there's something wrong with me, I'm not normal. Because like you say, that's what it was, her perception, understandably, back in the 90s of what should be normal. She was so brave, and I know that she really enjoyed the conversation, and she found it quite emotional, but she enjoyed it. And I believe that a lot of people listening to me found it really enlightening to hear how she got to that point where she just lives authentically now, and she's incredibly happy, and she's having an incredible time in her career, and I think a lot of that is her happiness within herself and how much she belongs to herself, and that's when she's thriving in her career, and just people are attracted to her. So it's really inspirational to see that happen with somebody.
You've just made me think of something there, because Jodie and I are good friends, and in fact, even though we're good friends, I learned things about her from listening to the podcast.
Yeah,
it's amazing how you winkle these things out of people that they don't want to talk about. But that idea of actually when people let go of this sort of imposed value that society or family or someone else has an expectation of them, and they spend a lot of time trying to meet that expectation, and then how freeing it is to say, no, hang on a minute, I don't have to meet that expectation, and how there has that virtuous circle of then, once they're comfortable in their own skin, they can blossom and grow. And I mean, Jodie's been doing amazing stuff.
She has,
it's made me think of some other things we might talk about later. So after Jodie, you spoke to John, didn't you?
Oh, sorry, no, Simon.
Simon Houghton. That's right.
Yes. Simon Houghton and I share the same hearing loss, very similar hearing loss. And that was a very emotional conversation for me. I'm sure it was a little bit for Simon as well, because we both had experiences in our childhood and growing up wearing hearing aids and feeling sort of caught between two worlds. Not deaf enough to be in completely a deaf community, but not also living in the hearing world, and that journey to try and find where you fitted into that. That was a really interesting conversation, and it really, really did transport me back in time to being, a teenager in Yorkshire, and keeping my hair permed and over my ears and all this sort of thing. But hearing Simon's story was really interesting, and really, really enjoyed talking to him. A great person, and again, he's doing really amazing things, and he's out there trying to educate the people in the workforce about unseen disabilities. Right. and how to help people with that. So it's just, again, just like, this is only halfway through the journey, but already I was experiencing this huge uplift in, it sounds really cheesy, but just in the world that I live in, and that actually there's a lot of people doing fantastic things out there. Yeah. And are all on their journey to find something. And it's all connected to belonging. I do believe that. Everybody's on that journey to try and find something, whether it's Fatima and she's got her ministry, or it's Simon doing what he's doing, or you doing your podcast and me doing my podcast and stuff. So, so that was Simon. That was a really good conversation, yeah.
When it reminded me of what you talking about in our conversation in episode 1 of... when you first got your hearing aids and you were really proud of them and you wanted to show them off, and you were confronted by the fact that other people didn't see it the same as you, and they were quite cruel in how they shared that with you and so on.
And Simon had some probably more upsetting stories than me about that. And I think sometimes potentially it was worse for him as a boy. I'm not sure. I don't want to assume that, but it reminded me a little bit of experience I've seen with my brother as well. So it was. I implore people to listen to that one, because it was whether you know somebody with hearing loss or not, it can apply to all sorts of disabilities or just experiences in life. And it was. There was a lot of empathy there between us. I think a lot of understanding. So.
And then it was John.
Oh, John. Yeah, John. Well, John was so amazing that we had to turn it into a 2-parter. Right. I mean, in fact, I think it would have been a 3-parter and would have continued if John had his chance. And no, I would definitely speak to John again. Now, John was very emotional, because we talked about his diagnosis of ADHD and just how empowering it's been for him, and how much he wants to help other people. To find that a diagnosis is something that can be really beneficial and really help you and make you feel better about yourself. But and he also in the second part he talks a lot about grief, losing his mum and also his lovely niece, who really sadly passed away. It was quite an emotional one, and I don't think John will mind me saying that he said I think there were quite a lot of tears shed from him and family members listening back to it. So it was quite therapeutic for everybody in his environment to listen to as well, which is great. But from a personal point of view, he dropped a lot of truth bombs. I mean, he's a really interesting guy, brilliant storyteller. He loves to come out with expressions that I've never heard before, but just some of them I do, but I always forget. And he's really good. He gives you these little truth bombs all the time. I did pick up a lot of things when he was talking about ADHD that I hadn't thought about before.
Okay.
And he's made me think a lot about things, potentially that I have some of those traits. It explains a lot about people that like to do lots of different things, wear lots of hats. That's a very common trait. But at the same time, I'm also keen to say, don't want to just put people in boxes all the time. But having these conversations is very, very helpful, because then you go, okay, well, I'll look into that. That might explain things. That might be helpful. What do you think?
Well, I'm just thinking about what you said about putting people into boxes. And I think that one of the things that becomes apparent when you start to talk to people who've had their challenges with, whether it's gender, sexuality, other diversity issues, it's only a problem when that characteristic is being compared to someone else's expectation. That's where the problem lies every time. So whether it's someone whose sexuality isn't the same as what they think society thinks they should be, or what their parents think they should be, if it's someone whose the way their brain works isn't the same as what society says is the norm, whether it's someone whose parenting or whose experience as a child is different, it's always this. I personally think the root of all evil at the moment is the categorization, is the putting people in boxes, because it's simple and it's easy to do. It's easy to say that's normal, and then anything else that isn't the same as that is not normal. And in my Neanderthal mind, I can that works for me. But the problem is, the reason why it's easy is because it doesn't require people to talk to people and find out and understand what that really means. And the reality is, there's 7-8 billion people in the world. There are 7 or 8 billion different stories. There are 7 or 8 billion different kinds of experience. And, the stuff we've been through with Andrew and Eve around becoming comfortable in their own skin, about their gender and that kind of stuff, ultimately, they've blossomed when they've realised that actually I am who I am, and I care less now about what other people expect of me, but are still confronted on an almost daily basis with that mentality of, you don't match my expectations, you don't fit the box, you're not the same.
So for the listeners of How to Belong, Andrew and Eve, can you just give a little insight?
Yeah,
into what
so
you mean?
Andrew's my sibling, and
Yes.
Andrew is non-binary.
Right.
So I have to be careful here because I'm not speaking on their behalf, but my understanding is that they don't like to be identified as a particular gender.
Right.
They are married and have a child that became part of their family because of a loss in their family. Andrew is a stand-up comedian, thrash punk, metal musician. I mean, full-on energy. You think, I've got some get up and go. They make me look like a wallflower. And some of that has come out of, over the last sort of 15 years, coming to terms with who they really are, right, and challenging society's norms and saying, well, there is a difference between sex and gender, and we can get into that whole debate. But actually educating people to say that because you look at me and you make a decision about what you think I am, I'd like you, please, to afford me the respect to find out whether I am the same as what you think I am, because it might be I'm different. And this is, in a lot of the workshops I do now, we often start off identifying people's pronouns, because for a large number of people, their pronoun is not something that's an issue for them. It's in line with how they present and they're comfortable with it. For a number of people, they like to be known by a different pronoun. So I personally think it's appropriate to ask everybody what pronoun they'd like to be known by, in the same way as you ask everybody what name you'd like to call them. On my birth certificate, my name is Stephen. Everyone calls me Steve. If you decided that you were going to call me Stephen because that's my actual name and it conforms with what my original name is, eventually that's going to get on my nerves.
Yeah,
and so I see gender as the same thing. I'd prefer you to call me they, them, or I'd prefer you to call me he or she, or what other option. It isn't a big ask. It's not. You're not really experiencing any difficulty by just referring to someone with a different gender to what you might automatically presume they have. And it's very interesting that people get so frustrated that people aren't. And to me, it comes back to conforming. They're not conforming. He looks like a bloke, so I should call him he. And my brain doesn't compute when they're saying to me, can you call me they, them, or can you call me she? And the other thing I've learned, so Eve, my daughter, she's trans, and the journey we've been on with her over the last few years, I've learned so much about this world and so much about the level of complexity that actually exists. We like things to be simple. As humans, we like things to be neat and tidy, and we know where they are. Many of us do. And actually, it's quite time-consuming to ask someone to talk about themselves and to understand a bit more about their values and what matters to them and so on. It's easier to categorize them as a gender or a political alliance or whatever category you want to choose. And, as humans, we're pattern matching animals. Our brains automatically, there's a pattern. You fit this pattern. And I didn't know until Eve went on the journey she's been on, that actually the idea of gender as opposed to a sex, it is literally non-binary. That actually, you might have someone who was born as a male, they prefer to be referred to as a female. They present as fairly androgynous. They're not very feminine in their presentation. Hoodie, jeans, trainers. standard uniform of teenage kids.
Well, that's it. It is a uniform.
Yeah. And then you might have someone else who was born male, but they're much more feminine, and they're in a different place to how they present and so on. And it's realizing that the only way you're ever going to know is to ask, really, to ask people what they prefer to be called. Again, it's not a big ask, I don't think.
No, but not at all. I think really interesting what you said before about, with putting people in boxes, and it kind of, I don't know why, but it came to me then, the idea of all these diamonds in boxes that reach the grade, the ones that reach that value system, and they get to be presented and sparkly, and because they're in that box and it's fine. But the ones that are a little bit different, a bit unique, and again, it might sound as though I've gone on a completely different tangent, but it's more from the point of view that it's a value system that's just been constructed, rather than looking at everything as unique and that's been on a journey.
It's artificial.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and I think that's what can be really make it so difficult sometimes for people just to find their way in the world, because there's just so many obstacles. There's so many obstacles, whether that's other people's views, other people's perception. I heard somebody the other day, and I think this will make you really cross, and I was a bit shocked because with me, I didn't have a clue what was what this person was alluding to, because I tend to sort of live in this sort of make-believe la-la land rather than, I was genuinely confused and in the dark. And so somebody made this comment about, but we haven't got a load of alphabet people here, have we? Do you know what that means? I didn't have a clue. So and because people were laughing, I kind of laughed along. I did that thing which you're not meant to do, and then I kind of did. I went, sorry, I don't actually know what does that mean. What does alphabet people mean? And then I realised it was the LGBT. Yeah, I'm quite happily a bit behind on that type of thing, catching up with people's whatever. Does that make you cross, that kind of comment?
So my response to that would be, it depends. I'd like to understand why that person said that, because it might be a misunderstanding. It might be that they genuinely don't understand the subject. So again, in order to make their life easier, they categorise people in one as other. Let's hope we haven't got alphabet people here, because what they're effectively saying is that makes my life difficult. Makes things a bit confusing for me. I was having a online debate on LinkedIn about a footballer who refused to wear the LGBT armband, and I don't do football, so I'm not an expert in this area. But the person said, "Is it wrong that they chose not to wear it?" And I said, it absolutely isn't wrong that they chose not to wear it, and at the same time, I'd like to understand why they chose not to wear it, because choosing not to wear it is one thing. Deciding what you think that says about the person, that's actually causing a problem. That's the root of the problem, because what you're doing is you're now categorising that person based on them displaying an armband different to the one that they've been asked to put on. So we're putting them in another box by saying, they're difficult, they don't like these values and so on. We don't know. Until we talk to them, we don't know. And
I love that. That's so true, Steve. That is so true. It's too. You're right. You can sit there on your moral high ground immediately in a situation like that, and you actually don't know what the other side of the fence is, do you? And then actually, you're right. Everybody's just boxing each other left, right, and centre. Wow. So I always find out something new from you. This is really interesting.
I've derailed the conversation, though. That's
well, I feel like, can I just mention one more guest, because I would hate not to do. So Hannah Roper Hannah Roper is the organiser of the Country Music Festival, and she told her story of finding country music as her place of belonging, in terms of, that was the music where she belonged, and how music communities can make you feel like you fit in somewhere according to what they wear and how they talk about things. She also had a really emotional journey overcoming domestic abuse. So that was really, really generous of her to share that. from my point of view, I was in my element because I think I mentioned before, I love country music. And but I asked her, one question I asked her, which I hadn't planned to do, was if she could have written a song, because she's a country singer as well, if she could have written a song herself, is there one that she would have wished she could have written, or one that really spoke to her? And she told me a song that I hadn't heard before. And it was so amazing, because that was a song that spoke to me 100% about the house that built me. It's called by Miranda Lambert, and I had that almost like exact experience after my mum died. That I went back to the house where I grew up, and listen to the song if you're open to that kind of music, because it's beautiful, and it's probably I can't believe I've never heard that song before, but it made me feel so peaceful. That was a song that lots of people have listened to, and that we all feel that way. Sometimes we want to go back to our reference point where we felt comfortable and we felt security and we felt ultimate belonging. And I think, the childhood homes are so special, not to everybody, but to a lot of us. Actually, that kind of leads me to a question I want to ask you, right, if I'm not jumping ahead a bit too much, because it's making me think about Christmas, actually, mm-hmm, and this time of year when things like your home or returning back to your home become very apparent, don't they? And it can be lovely if you've got a childhood home to go back to. Some people may be adults with grown-up children themselves that can still go back to their family home, and that must be absolutely wonderful. I don't anymore have that, but I'm bringing my own children up and trying to give them the security and comfort that they want. Now, you, Steve, your personal story there is different to mine. You're remarried and have a lovely stepson living at home with you, and your children come back and forth to visit you. So you've got that blended family experience. What's Christmas like for you? How have you found that over years? Because it can be quite hard for people at this time of year. Would you agree?
Definitely agree. It's an interesting question, because just listening to you talking to there about your childhood home and thinking about your childhood home. As an adult, I've moved 16 times in my adult life. So
that's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, as soon as I left, as a kid, we went from Portsmouth to went to Hong Kong with my dad for a couple of years, and then back to Portsmouth again, and then up to South London. But then as soon as I left home, I don't think I stayed anywhere for like more than 2 or 3 years. And I've never, as an adult, I've never really had a sense of home and a sense of belonging to home. And when I look back on my childhood, we moved when I was 12, so the first 12 years were here, which is ironic really, because I've ended up here, where we live is like 10 minutes drive away from where I was born as a kid. Yeah, so I ended up all the way up via Scotland and so on, and came back again. So to answer the question, part of me thinks, well, my perception and my experience of childhood home might be different to some people's. So therefore, how could I identify what I think our kids' childhood home, whether that was right, wrong, good, bad, and certainly when me and the kid's mum separated, it was horrible. It was awful. It was
Were they little then? Or?
Yeah. So they were young, and it was a very difficult time, and we kind of got into a routine of where I would drive up on a Friday night. I'd drive from here in Portsmouth up to Essex, collect the 2 kids, bring them down here. Then on a Sunday, I'd take them back. So I'd do that same journey every other week. And I did that for 10 years. And I did it because I felt like, I'm responsible for making sure that they're looked after. So they stayed, in their school, and I didn't feel it was right to cause that level of disruption. They stayed in Essex. Yeah. And I saw myself as the one who was responsible for doing the journey up and down and bringing them up and down and so on. And in the early days, it was quite traumatic. And then as we got into, well, what does Christmas look like, for example? I suppose on the one hand, I think I'm fair in saying there was an element of, well, they got 2 or 3 Christmases and 2 or 3 birthdays. So when they were young, there was actually a bit of an upside. But
and holidays, I guess, as well.
Yeah. And so, you know, that was tricky. And one of the things that became quite significant for me, and it took me a long time to learn this, is there is a massive difference between my expectation of how I think they're feeling and how they are actually feeling. And because that was driven by guilt. You know, so I had a tremendous level of guilt about, I've caused this problem, I've caused this difficult situation. I'm not saying that was true, but that was
in your head, that's how you perceived it. Yeah,
I've caused this situation. It's for me to put right, it's for me to solve. And so, you know, I'd talk to my kids every night, every single night without fail, phone call every night. And that was really important, certainly until Laura got a bit older. And then, you know, once she was sort of doing A-levels and then into uni, of course, you know, that sort of stuff peeled off. But with Eve, certainly, you know, right from the word go, it was a phone call every night and so on. And if that phone call didn't happen, I'd be tearing my hair out because I would imagine
what they were thinking.
Yeah. And in my head, the story I'm telling myself is Dad doesn't love us. He doesn't want to talk to us. And despite the fact that it wasn't me who was not making the call happen, you know, I couldn't get hold of them or they'd be out somewhere or whatever. And the default position was they must think I don't love them because I'm not speaking to them. And I committed to speak to them every day. And it took a long, long time for me to get my head around the fact that actually that couldn't be further from their minds. You know? They're at an ice rink, or they're out having ice cream with their mum, or they're with their friends, or whatever. So it took a long time to learn the difference between what actually matters to the kids and what I thought mattered to the kids. So coming back to the point about Christmas, it took a long time to learn that actually they might not want a family Christmas in the same way. And we got into a routine of my kids would come to our house. The 5 of us would have a Christmas meal and a Christmas celebration before Christmas. And then my 2 would go to their mums. Charlie would go and see his dad on, you know, Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or Boxing Day or whatever. And often on Christmas Day, it was just Lisa and me for a period of time. And of course, that conflicted with the fact that from Lisa's perspective, she, quite rightly, wanted Charlie to have his Christmas Day on Christmas Day. So there was this conflict between us as to what were we calling Christmas Day? What, you know, when is it sort of thing? And it took us a long time to get into a relaxed sort of way of thinking about this and making it work in a way that mattered to the kids. And for Lisa and I, our fundamental driver is about what's the most important thing for the kids, not just today, but long term. And now the relationship I've got with all 3 of those kids is remarkable. I say kids, like Laura's 24 now, and you know, so but it's remarkable. It's really good. It's a really good relationship, and I'm convinced it's because we both worked. Lisa and I both worked, and the kids worked hard to make sure that we were doing the right thing at the right time more often than not. And I think we're now benefiting from the impact of that. So rather than, for example, me saying, because I want to talk to the kids, I'm gonna get all arsey about that and scream and shout until it happens, sort of thing. It's been able to say, I need to park what I want today, and I need to understand what matters to them. And I think it's brought a degree of maturity. So the reality is, we don't have one Christmas Day where all the kids are together and it's the same day every year. We don't have that arrangement, and we haven't had for 13 Christmases.
But that's okay, isn't it?
It's okay, yeah.
But coming to that point where you say, that's okay, I don't have to tick the boxes. I mean, God, actually, Christmas is the most a perfect example of something that's going to put pressure on us. We call it the wish list, don't we?
Yeah.
We have this thing, the Christmas wish list. And on that wish list of family perfection is everybody's got to be around this table, all those things.
And the irony is, I now look at other people's more traditional Christmases, where you've got families that travel the country to be with their families. They don't fight as much as they do on Christmas Day. The families have the big fallouts and the big arguments and all that kind of stuff. Seems to happen a lot around this time of year. And I do wonder if it's because, come back to conflict, some people in that house want it to be nice and cosy and all that kind of stuff. Other people are saying, well, I'm not normally in your world every day. This is an unusual arrangement coming to your house for Christmas, whether that's kids to parents, parents to kids, or whatever way around it is. And we're kind of almost creating this false idea of what the day should be like, where underneath, we're getting annoyed because Auntie Mabel's burping while she's eating her food, or
that's
Uncle
really random.
I don't know.
I don't feel like Auntie Mabel's come from nowhere. I feel like that's come from some event in your life.
No, I don't think it has. Or Uncle Jim is making obnoxious comments, or
Jimmy Jim Bob,
yeah, Jimmy Jim Bob.
Big him back. No.
And I do. And I have literally just in this moment kind of thought about it. Maybe it's another example of this sort of artificial thing that we want to happen. We want the day to be nice and everybody to be, enjoying each other's company. But reality is, if you've got family members that don't see each other at any other time of year, you put them together in a room, and we've had it in our family Christmases. People have come to blows because there is a conflict. There's a conflict that doesn't normally have that friction, because they're not normally sort of butting up against each other.
Do you think that some of the conflict comes from this feeling of security that you may have had when you were a child around Christmas time, and then as an adult, when you're forced into, say, your partner's family, or to go to a different house, that they're doing that day, or the tradition, they're playing out differently to how you did it as a child, and because it's so important to you, and you probably don't even recognise it as an adult, because it reaches through time to a place when you felt, not everybody does, but I'm going to make a generalisation, when you felt very secure and safe, and you felt like this was special. For somebody else to have their other version of special because it came from a different house, a different Christmas tree, and a different tradition. That's where the conflict comes from, and often it's that we talk about, we all become like children again. We play these scenarios out. I don't know about you and Lisa, but Julie and I first got together, we definitely did Christmas morning differently because of our families. Okay. I just think I think it brings out this very intense emotion, and I think a lot of the time it's connected to our childhood, and it could be positive or negative. What do you think?
That's interesting. You're definitely right, and I think that. But I think about people like Fatima.
Exactly.
I bet she doesn't have fond memories of family Christmases.
No, you're right.
And there are lots of people in the world that don't have that experience, and I do wonder if it's because of this perception that society says it should be a family day and you should love it. And, my memories of Christmas are a pillowcase with a Brazil nut and an orange and a 10 pence in it. And, I think when we first moved to South London, I got a pen. And that was it. That's
I'm only laughing because
times are hard.
I'm sorry, I must say this because I'm laughing because you just remind me of the conversation with my husband. It's really similar.
Right, really?
I think you're similar age. It's really similar, and he had a very different view of Christmas to me.
Yeah,
his expectations are way lower than mine was. I'm not going to lie. I was, it was a Disney version of Christmas at the time. Yeah, which I've never been able to completely be able to replicate. But set me up for fail. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, but you see, that's an interesting point, because 20 years in retail, if you want to kill the Christmas spirit, spend 20 years working in retail. Because retail at Christmas is all it means is hard work. It just means hard work. And
vultures. People like vultures behaving like
absolutely.
crazy.
Yeah, and people being. I saw a retail week thing the other week about 80% of retail staff have received abuse at some point in their career. People do treat retail staff badly, I know, and all Christmas is in the early days when it used to be more about sort of the pre-Christmas period. I used to work in Dixon's, and it would just be absolutely bonkers, working long days right up until Christmas Eve. Back then, you'd have Christmas Day and Boxing Day off and then come back. And then later in my retail career, when I moved into the furniture, you just get Christmas Day. All you get is Christmas Day. So you can't relax on Christmas Day because you've worked really hard up until Christmas Eve, late. You're going to be back in work tomorrow. And it's the same for Lisa. So this year, she'll be in work on Boxing Day. So that ability to be able to relax on Christmas is limited anyway. And I think children are significant in terms of how people feel about it. Because for me, I was never a fan of Christmas myself. But of course, I loved the fact that the kids loved Christmas. And so you do it for the kids and so on. So, I kind of grew to love the idea of the kids being happy and it being a time of wanting to make them happy and that kind of stuff. But again, you talk about this Disney idea of what Christmas was like, and then you look at like the amount of stuff that gets purchased and the amount of consumption that takes place. And again, I'd ask the question: Is that right? Is that what Christmas should be? God, we've got very deep here all of a sudden.
We have, no, because it's a big subject, and we probably need to be another episode. But it is a big subject. I mean, I'm going to put my hands up and say I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of wanting to even when my children are now that much older, to have lots of presents under the tree, which is silly.
But I don't think the words guilty and silly are the right. I don't think. Well, I think you're being hard on yourself.
But thank you.
I think it's what many people do.
Look,
you're not alone.
You're sitting opposite somebody who was seriously considering taking their dog to the Santa Paws grotto. Okay. I'm not doing it, don't worry. But you're just looking at me very blankly right now.
I'm not.
You are, Steve, you are. And I totally don't blame you. I saw it advertised, and for a moment, I just felt really sad, silly and sad. I'm going to put silly in again, because my children are too old to go, like far too old to go to Santa's grotto, and I kind of missed it. And then there was an opportunity to take my dog to a grotto.
I haven't got a problem with that. I think that's a great thing to do.
We're not doing it.
Surely you and your dog will be very happy.
I will put some Santa's ears on her. I will give her a bone myself. Okay, there we go. Moving on.
But I do, and I guess maybe, if we're thinking about belonging, thinking about do families belong together at Christmas? I think the answer again is it depends. We lost my dad last Christmas, so that time of year. Thank you. That time of year now has a different flavour.
Yeah.
Because what was going on was pretty challenging. So I think it depends on what your experience is. I think it depends on what your expectations are. But I think what's consistent is it's a minefield. It's fraught with danger because knowing what people want and, what do they want to eat and drink and are we all going to wear the same colour outfits or, So David, my brother, he and I are very different on Christmas. He will be suited, booted, suit, jacket, tie. It's an absolute dressing up occasion. And I respect the fact that for him, that's and his side of the family, that's important. That's their Christmas. I'm like, literally, you've got to drag me kicking and screaming into any kind of clothes.
Okay, you have naked Christmas?
No, not naked Christmas. No, well, when the kids aren't around, that's a different situation. But no, what I mean is I don't get dressed up. I don't.
Pajamas.
I just pair of joggers or whatever. Yeah. And to be fair to Lisa, perhaps I should make more effort. But
well, maybe she likes naked Steve. I don't know.
Well, maybe, yeah. We'll find out when she listens to the podcast.
Sorry, Lisa. So not putting ideas in his head for you.
So I've lost my train of thought now. No. So it's a really interesting question about families belonging Christmas. Gosh, what I've learned is that certainly with your kids, what matters is what's going to help them in the long term. What is going to put them in a position where when they become adults, because I also have a view that I think we have more influence over our kids than we really do. I think as parents, we think we influence their values and their behaviours and so on more than we actually do.
I think you're right.
And so it's kind of, how can we just help them, nudge them, support them, educate them in a way that then when they become adults and they make their decisions about what they want to do in relation to family, they do what's right. And certainly my two daughters, I have a very different relationship with them. Laura, I'll speak to her once in a blue moon. She'll come for Christmas. She'll come for birthdays. She's independent. She travels the world, went to Canada for 6 months. She's out and about. I really don't see her very much. Eve is down the road in Southampton. I speak to her at least twice a week. I see her regularly. So even with my own children from the same marriage, if you like, where they came from, I have very different relationships with the two of them. It's not kind of homogenized into cookie cutter. It's always the same sort of thing.
Which makes it a good thing for us to recognise, because you watch these Christmas movies. We were talking about Christmas movies before we started this.
Including Die Hard, which is a Christmas movie.
I have never seen Die Hard.
Because it happens at Christmas, in a building at Christmas time, at a Christmas party.
Yeah, but it's got mean things happening. We don't want mean things happening. We want magic.
Well, mean things,
it's a wonderful life.
People do mean things to Elf. He has mean things done to him.
Elf? What happens?
He gets the Mickey taken out of him because he's not the same size as all the other.
Yeah, but then he goes and calls somebody else Elf, and he's not meant to call him an elf.
Anyway,
maybe it hasn't.
That's a different podcast episode.
I love Will Ferrell, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, me too. Massive fan.
Big fan. Yeah. I mean, it's a big subject, this, isn't it? How relationships with family members, the pressure at Christmas time. It isn't a Christmas movie in reality. We don't all have this idealistic relationship with our parents or with our other family members. Hopefully we have with some, but maybe not all. And it can make people feel, I think it can make people quite, maybe a bit lonely sometimes, a bit isolated, because of the Christmas movie and the most wonderful time of the year. That's a phrase that you see all over the place. And in fact, I had to write something as part of my marketing job recently, and I deliberately wrote at this most wonderful time of year, and I think the client did question it. Why have you put that? And I said, because to some people it's not the most wonderful, and I think that change in words is quite subtle, but it's quite important. And they agreed with me. I said, because if you're grieving, it's not the most wonderful time of year. I just wanted to change that wording a bit, because I think it's important to recognise it's a highly emotional time, and it can be magical, and let's hope it is. And certainly this episode is not meant to be a negative one. I just think it's good to have the conversation, hopefully take off that pressure a little bit.
But don't you think there's similarities between what you've talked about in your podcast about people who've encountered there is some kind of expectation, and initially they feel like they fall short of that expectation, and then they realise that they don't need to be accountable to someone else's slide rule, someone else's expectations. To me, there's a similarity actually between the expectation of what should happen on a traditional Christmas day with families and kids and so on, and what actually happens. There's that gap between the sort of, what should it be like and what really... And I do think that if you get too focused on what it should be like, if you want that diamond to be too perfect, you're never going to get there, and you're always going to be unhappy and disappointed. And I'm not suggesting people should just say like, well, whatever, but maybe just letting go of that aspiration for it to be, I want Christmas to be like the most amazing day, and I want my kids to look back and think it's the most magical time of the year. Your reality to deliver that is you are setting yourself up for a challenge, aren't you? You. What?
I absolutely agree. I think it's a very good parallel to draw, because we talked about it so much about from the day you're born you're meant to fit into something. You meant and then you were talking about kids' uniform, the teenage uniform. Well, I remember that with my boys. There was a definite stage when it was the hoodies and it was that, and then actually now they've finally got to a point where they're 18 and 19, that they're really unique and individual with how they do things, and very different to each other. And they're not following, perfect a gang or a fad or whatever else. And that's the journey that we're always on constantly in life, to try and we'll go round and round in circles, probably sometimes repeating that pattern, and sometimes going, nope, I remember I'm not meant to do that. I'm meant to follow my own path. Yeah. But Christmas draws us back in every time. So you know it, and you probably learnt it somewhere in your teens. Actually, no, I don't need to fit in. I'm going to do my own thing. And then you lose it again. You join a different office, and it becomes so much pressure. Or you might have a different relationship, and that family's got a certain way, and you've got to fit in there. And then you go, nope, not doing that again. I'm going to go back to being who I am again. And it's a constant. Maybe some people it isn't. Maybe some people are really good at staying on path. Christmas is an easy one to throw you off path, I think. But
it's interesting to think about, and going back to where we were talking before about how to belong, and the people you've spoken to, and the people that you've had on, and those parallels between expectations and reality, and the problem being in the gap. Mind the gap.
Mind the gap.
So, podcasts, what's happening with How to Belong next year then? Where are you going with that?
Yes, I've already recorded quite a few of the episodes. I recorded a lovely one this morning. It's keeping pretty much the same format. I would say that some of the interviews or some of the guests that I've got coming on this next season are people that not necessarily are on that hero story arc, but more that they've got a certain level of expertise that they can bring to the table. Right. So we've got therapist and coach. We've got an award-winning best-selling author who is such an erudite, and I wish the conversation could have been longer because I could have spoken to her forever, and I'm really excited, but we've got to wait for that one a bit later in the year to actually come out. And yeah, we're going to be talking about friendship and belonging. We're going to talk about, I've got an incredible member of the UN nation, peacekeeping, talk about conflict and how we deal with that. Yeah, lots of things coming ahead. I'm really looking forward to it.
Exciting stuff.
What about you?
Good question. It's funny because Sharp Podcast has sort of evolved over time, and for listeners who are listening to this now, hello listener, we haven't done a sort of a full episode for a little while, and we've done a lot of these free fast 3 episodes where every fortnight we're doing this 3 quick tips, which is podcast recommendation. Obviously we've recommended How to Belong twice. A sort of I don't like the phrase life hack, but if I say it, you know what I mean. An idea or a tip about something that might just make things easier or whatever, usually in the area of productivity or all that kind of stuff. And then something about training, because that's my experience, that's my bag. And I realise a lot of people that listen to the podcast informally get involved in some kind of training, even if it's just showing someone how to do something. So it's kind of how you can incorporate things in those conversations that help. So a podcast recommendation, a life idea, and a training thing. I originally started that as an email, and that email is still going every fortnight. So listener, sign up, sondevelopment.com/contact. Sign up for that. If you sign up for that, you get the email in your inbox. You get the email, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
Very good.
I think this one that just went out this week is one of the best, actually. But then I decided to say, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll speak that email out loud and I'll record it as a podcast. And again, that's kind of evolved into this 5-minute, very quick conversation, which then begs the question, well, what are we doing with Sharp Podcasts in terms of those bigger episodes and the guests? And also, because SON Development, my business, where I do the kind of the skills development and the training and that kind of stuff, and the podcast production, the video production, and Sharp Podcasts have kind of joined forces. So I talk about SON Development quite a lot in the podcast. Being clear about how I can support those two maybe slightly different audiences is where my challenge has been. So I think certainly as we go into next year, it'll be a mix. So this episode will go out as an episode, and there'll still be the fast 3. I've got a couple of people lined up who have said they want to come on. One I'm very excited about, which we were talking before we started recording about, breath work and cold showers. So that'd be good. So yeah, hopefully the listeners will come on the journey with us and get some benefit from it. That's
bring
that's
on
all I hope.
2025.
Yes, it's not far away, is it?
Not far away.
So I think I'd love people who haven't listened to maybe some of the recent Sharp podcast episodes. If you've got some downtime over Christmas, they're all there in the archive. I think it's 85 now. So go and have a look.
You're showing off now.
And again, for How to Belong.
Yes, please. Yeah, they're all. Each one is. I personally very biased, but I think a magical storytelling. I'm not going to take the credit for that. So I'm very fortunate to have the guests that I've had on. So yeah, sometimes we need to go for a walk on the beach or in the woods or wherever you are. That's how I like to listen to my podcast. Or even if you're hoovering up, if you can turn your headphones up loud enough to listen to it, it can be a really good thing to do to give yourself some time away and reflect. So.
And I think what we both bring to our listeners is there's some sort of interesting stories and ideas, but you found podcasting to be pretty profound for you, didn't you? When you lost your mum.
It still is. When I took a break a few weeks ago because we had some medical thing to deal with, I quickly found myself getting a bit lost again. And as soon as I started interviewing again and getting back into podcasting, it kept me on that path, as I was talking about. Keep yourself on your own. Belonging path, and that's really cheesy, but
I like it. So, dear listeners, carry on listening.
Yes.
Subscribe, tell your friends, share, subscribe, all that stuff.
Review, yeah.
Review, yeah. Yeah, it'd be great.
And I'd just like to say thank you for listening. Thank you to you, Steve, for being so supportive. And I'm looking forward to the journey continuing with you. And I just hope everybody has a lovely Christmas and we all feel happy as we can be.
Yeah, 100%. Whatever Christmas is like for you, or the holiday season, whatever you call it, I hope you have the best one you can.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next year.
See you next year. Bye
See you later.
for now.
Bye.